Hola, mi gente. ¿Cómo están? Welcome again to another episode. Welcome to the Limbo Latino podcast. If you're in the wrong room, I deeply apologize, but I hope that you stick around and hang out with us. This is our podcast for the people. I'm your host, Joseph Colon, aka the Limbo Latino. I'm looking forward to today's episode. Many listeners have actually responded to me and asked me to feature some up and coming trailblazers. And I think today we have an exceptional leader in her own right. But before we start this show, you know the deal. Your homework is to make sure that you subscribe to the podcast. No excuses. Rate it, like it, share it. If you can rate it a 5 and comment wherever you can to get your podcast. Make sure that you are engaged as much as possible. This helps immensely in our reach to get this information out to the masses. Again, we need all your support. Tell your friends, family. Also, make your way to the YouTube channel and the Limbo Latino, and you can see the full interview in all its glory. Again, this podcast is dedicated to you and to uplift our people in a different way, to reframe our history, to also pay homage to our ancestors, their contributions, but also, like I said, our future movers and shakers and how they influence. So today in our episode, I've asked one of my dear student leaders from way back in the day, who is now big time, and her name is Jasmin Chavez. And she is a dynamic leader with a track record in civic engagement, legislative advocacy, and organizing. She holds degrees in political science and Spanish from McDaniel College. And at McDaniel, Jasmin founded McDaniel LULAC, which is the League of United Latin American Citizens. And she served as president for the council for 3 years. Jasmin attributes her success to the experiences and commitment to the community within AARP's legal counsel for the elderly and as the state director for I'm going to try that one more time. Jasmin attributes her success to the experiences and commitment to the community within AARP's legal counsel for the elderly and as the state director for Virginia LULAC. Jasmin is an alumna of the Congressional Hispanic Caucus Institute, the White House Initiative on Educational Excellence for Hispanics, the UCLA Labor Center's Dream Summer Program, and HACU. Jasmin's commitment to uplifting her community has earned her recognition as a recipient of the LULAC National Woman of the Year Award in 2018 and as a recipient of the Benjamin A. Gilman International Scholarship. Jasmin loves giving back to her community by serving on several boards, including McDaniel's Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Advisory Board, the Smithsonian Latino Center's Young Ambassadors Alumni Network, and Victoria for Congress. Jasmin is a fierce leader who is passionate about social justice, and I am sure that after you hear her today, you'll see why she is such an important trailblazer. So, I welcome Jasmin. How are you?
Good. Thank you so much for having me, Joe. I'm super excited to be here.
Awesome. I've been following you for years, and so I definitely needed to make sure that we got you on the podcast, especially in our inaugural first season. So I just wanted to thank you again for participating and being a part of this whole process. And I hope that you have a great time, kind of showcasing who you are. So, are you ready?
Yes, I'm ready.
Awesome. So, with all of my guests, I've been able to ask this one simple question, but I want you to spend some time to let our people know your story, who you are, and how you came to be.
Definitely. So, I immigrated to this country at the age of 1 with my parents from El Salvador. We ended up in Falls Church, Virginia. We came to this country with absolutely nothing. We had no idea we were going to come. We mainly fled because of the violence of the Salvadoran Civil War and the effects of it. So that's why we immigrated. And so we came to Falls Church, Virginia. I grew up there. That's where I spent middle school, elementary school, and high school. And growing up in that community, it was a very predominantly immigrant community, very low income. I wasn't even 10 when my mom started asking me to translate documents for my community members. And so, doing that kind of work, translating documents and talking to folks, it made me realize, that there were a lot of injustices in the immigrant community. And me being an immigrant myself, it was something that hit home for me. And so it was around middle school that I decided to do something about it. And so I decided to organize food and clothing drives, because, I looked at a lot of my community members and I thought of my family and myself when I saw them, because a lot of folks, didn't have enough money for food or didn't have enough money for clothing. And, as someone who has been in that situation, I felt like I had to do something about it. And so, fast forward to high school, I decided to do some lobbying work. I got involved with VACOLAO, which is the Virginia Coalition for Latino Organizations. And I believe it was sophomore year of high school where I was able to lobby for in-state tuition. I know at the time it was under attack, and I was, I think, one of 8 youth students who were able to advocate, for this very important piece of legislation. And it was truly eye-opening because, we got back from Richmond, and the media was waiting there for us. It was an experience that, made me realize that our voices do matter. And I was so young at the time that, I didn't really feel like my voice mattered. But that day, I really felt like my voice mattered because I was able to share my experiences. And while I may have not been able to change the minds of some of my legislators, I was able to, maybe change the way they felt about it, in their heart, because it's an issue that affects a lot of us very directly, immigration. And so I was able to talk about firsthand experience with my members of uh, Congress and the delegates of Virginia. And so after that experience, I got involved with LULAC, which stands for the League of United Latin American Citizens. I mainly got involved with them because I met Cindy Benavides during one of my lobbying trips to Richmond, and she told me to get connected to LULAC, so I got involved. I also got connected to the Congressional Hispanic Caucus Institute in high school because I participated in the R2All Next Gen program, and that program completely changed my life. I had never seen myself as a leader until then. And just thinking about, just reminiscing and thinking about CHCI in general, I basically grew up with them. I spent high school, all of college, and even now as an adult under their mentorship and their support. And I'm just immensely grateful that, they've been a part of, you know, that those stages in my life, because I I really took advantage of all the professional development they've offered, all of the networking experiences. And I have a familia, which, I didn't really have a Latino community, that I could call a familia here in Virginia. And I have that with CHCI. Whatever I need, they are there to provide me with advice, support, and I'm just incredibly thankful for them. And so, I went off to McDaniel. Um, just the college process itself was very difficult for me because my family, like I mentioned, is we immigrated to this country. We had no idea what anything was. And so my parents weren't able to help me with the college application process. I had to seek CHCI's advice, LULAC's advice. I had some good high school teachers at Jeb Stewart, which is now called Justice, to support me and assist me with, writing the essays. And that's how I was able to go off to college. And I thankfully went with almost a full ride. And I honestly don't think I would have been able to go had it not been for that much money, because my parents can't afford school. Growing up, they could barely afford food, so it was just like, I'm either going to college if I get a full ride, or I'm not going to go because there was literally no other option. And so I'm incredibly thankful for getting that big scholarship from McDaniel, but also for all of the mentorship and support they gave me throughout college. It was a bit of a shock to get to McDaniel because it's it's a predominantly white institution. I saw 10 Latinos on campus my freshman year. Every year, maybe I saw one more Latino being added to the different classes, but it was a whole different community. Very, um, it was a community that didn't have a lot of Latinos, and so when I spent some time in the community, in the Westminster, Maryland community, I realized that there was a lot of discrimination towards Latinos. I, at one point, sang in the choir at the church nearby McDaniel, and there were folks who were very, outspoken. They felt very, they were very outspoken when it came to voicing their opinions about the Latino immigrant community in Westminster. So it was then that I was like, you know what, I think we need to start a LULAC council here because, we're not talking about Latino issues, because at McDaniel they had a Latino club, but it only focused on culture. We didn't have anything advocacy related. We actually didn't have any orgs on campus that did any advocacy work. And so immediately I thought my freshman year, like, we need to start a LULAC council because um it wasn't just me that felt, this discrimination. A lot of folks, a lot of Latino students would come to me saying, oh, I went to Walmart and someone said this to me, a racial slur, or someone, said this to me. And it it's still happening. It's a very it's a community that's it's a very racist community if we're being really honest. And so creating that LULAC council was just like amazing, and the amount of work we were able to do like still blows my mind to this day because we were when I was in college, we had a presidential election in 2016, and so we did a lot of mobilizing of the community, getting the Latino vote out, making sure folks got to the polls, making sure folks were at least registered to vote. And we had a lot of different events focusing on the immigrant community. We had DACA teach-ins. We had um, we had DreamAct summits. We had a lot of events focused on immigration, but we also had a lot of events focused on healthcare and education. And in addition to that, every year that I was president, we attended the Emerge Latino Conference, which is a conference that happens in DC every year that focuses on empowering young adults from across the country. And so it's actually coming up in March, which I'm very excited for because I'm going to be able to see our new McDaniel LULAC president. And so it just, it reminds me of, that my work wasn't in vain, that, it's continuing. And, it just, for me, that's what's fulfilling, like seeing that the work is being continued, seeing that folks are still doing this advocacy work. Like that is why I created McDaniel LULAC so that, you know, we could be advocates in the community, but also teach others about how to advocate in their communities as well. And so that's what empowers, that's what people need, empowerment. And so that's still there at McDaniel, and I'm super happy about that. But going after, talking more about, after college, I graduated with my degree in political science and Spanish. And my first job right out of college was at an immigration law firm. And it was a good experience. For me, the highlight of that job would be that I was able to go to the border. I fundraised a lot of money along with a group of folks to be able to go to the border and, stay there and help asylees, with, their asylum applications, just helping them with that process. And so for me, like, that experience was just like eye opening because it just like made everything feel come full circle, right? Because I came to this country at the age of 1, and now out of college, my first job was going to the border and helping folks who were essentially, who look like me and who have a similar story to me. And so for me, like, that was just incredibly emotional, eye-opening, but it also helped me realize that I'm on the right track, that I'm doing what I love, and that I'm working with the community that I wanted to work with, low income immigrant community. And so to this day, now I work at Legal Counsel for the Elderly. The work that we do at Legal Counsel for the Elderly, it focuses on providing free legal services to low income DC residents. And so in my role, I connect the organization with Latinx organizations, and I assist our attorneys with client cases. And so for me, up until now, all the work that I've done, it all connects because I've wanted my life to focus on assisting the low income immigrant Latinx community because you know it just it's something that I identify with. And for me, the work wouldn't be fulfilling if that wasn't what I was doing. So that's why I do the work that I do, and that's why I work with low income Latinx immigrants. So
Jasmine,
that's my story.
that that is an amazing story, and we're gonna continue to venture into the rest of your story because you have so much more that you've done, and it's amazing that in your stage in your life that you've actually accomplished so much. I wanted to talk about specifically, and I know we hadn't talked about this, but I think it connects with what you just said, the identities piece. What are some things that, especially for our listeners and folks who are chiming in who may or may not know much about the immigrant community or DACA, or just, you don't have to give us a full lesson, but what are some misconceptions about those communities in particular, and why it's important for us as people who are in social justice, or even folks who are just maybe on the outskirts trying to learn more? What is it? Why is it important for us to really engage this topic?
I think it's important to engage this topic because at one point or another, we've met someone, with an immigrant background or someone who is an immigrant. And so I think it's important for us to be knowledgeable on, the different terminology and issues because, being a dreamer is different from being a DACA recipient, right? Because a DACA recipient, they are able to, they have identification. A dreamer, isn't able to apply for DACA, and DACA only a couple of folks were able to apply for DACA because there was a certain like age you had to be a certain age after a certain time. And so I know, for example, my godbrother, he wasn't able to apply for DACA because he had passed the age and the year that you had to apply for it. And so it's important to know that terminology, but also understand that everyone who's an immigrant, not everyone who's an immigrant is undocumented, right? Like, I came to this country, I'm not undocumented, but I connect a lot with folks who are undocumented because I understand what they've gone through. Because it's just coming to a different country and having to experience, you know, having to, figure out this whole new world. It's like trying to figure out a whole new world, trying to understand a new language, trying to understand, all the things that are created by, this new government, this new societal structure. It's a lot. And so I totally feel the experience. I didn't, travel across the border and, go through, really awful situations that, you know, some undocumented folks have gone through, like just terrible things that have happened or on the border, violence, just terrible things. I didn't experience that, but you know, I know, and I've seen movies, but I also have family members who have gone through that. So through their experiences, I'm able to understand, like it's incredibly difficult, like all that they've gone through, and I connect with it, and I may not directly identify with it, but I'm an immigrant as well because my parents, we immigrated, and just the whole idea of migration, everyone who has migrated to another country, they identify with each other because it's a whole new ball game, it's a whole new world. And in college we did a lot of research on migration, and a book that I highly recommend to folks is The Distance Between Us by Reina Grande, because in that book, whether you're an immigrant or not, you're able to understand what migration means, like in depth. And Reina Grande, through her story, is able to really, explain to us what migration looks like. And I cried so many times during that book because it's just so emotional, but it really gives you an understanding of, what migration is, why people do it. Whether it's for safety, for fleeing violence, for money. A lot of our Latin American countries, a lot of us come from very impoverished backgrounds in Latin America. So some of us don't have any other choice but to come here to try to find better opportunities for our families. And so um, I think I hope I answered your question, Joe,
No,
but
you did, and I think the reason why I framed it that way is because I think for a lot of people they may or may not have the language around it or the information needed to kind of not make a decision, but to really talk about how do you support or how do you engage or how do you even advocate for people who are in some of these situations. And it's not as easy as someone trying to come over the border. It's a lot more complicated than that to some degree, and that we need to be looking at it from a lens of humanity and really encapsulating the experiences. And we've seen many of the things that have happened at the detention centers and things that have been occurring throughout the past 5 even 10 years of kind of this intense migration and immigration, and basically looking at it from a different perspective. So I know that it's a little bit more entrenched and a little bit more difficult to talk about, but I think that I would like our listeners to really, and thank you for dropping that, specifically dropping that book, because I also what I'll do every month is I'll give out a giveaway, and so I'll make sure to give that book to someone, one of our subscribers. So remember to subscribe to our mailing list. But Jasmine, yeah, thank you so much for putting a highlight on that, because I think for me myself, I'm Puerto Riqueño, so my citizenship is intact. But to think about looking at other people's plight and the way that they're really trying to achieve not just the American dream, but just to live so that their generations are continuously being supported and given opportunities that are their right as human beings to live and to be prosperous. So, I think about your work, and again, as I said, I've been following you on social media and kind of, really been looking forward to this interview. You talk about LULAC immensely, and that intense relationship that you have and that camaraderie. Talk to me about that and why that organization is such an important one. I'd like to highlight them, and how can people get involved in particular, and how they can engage and support that group.
definitely. I say that LULAC is very important to me because you know, I basically, I grew up with them. I spent high school, college, and now actually now I spend a lot more time working with them as the state director because I'm managing a whole state. But, when I met Cindy Benavides, who is now the CEO of LULAC, back in the day, she told me to look into LULAC because of professional development opportunities for youth. And at the time, I was in high school, I was a little shy. I was lobbying in Richmond, but I was constantly asked to, you know, speak louder because as the shy persona that I had, I wasn't, I didn't have the professional development that I needed. And so she's like, you should connect with LULAC. And so I got home from that event, Googled the organization, and the rest is history. So, like I mentioned earlier, I started a council at McDaniel because we didn't have a Latinx advocacy group on campus. We actually didn't have an advocacy group on campus at all. They all focused on culture. And so, when I became president, a big focus for me was making sure that our students attended Emerge, which is the conference that happens every year in DC. We had immigration town halls, we attended marches and rallies together. We traveled across the country for conventions, and we lobbied on the Hill and in Richmond, and we also held fundraisers. And like I mentioned earlier, a big thing for us was the 2016 presidential election. So in 2016, we registered 200 Latinos on and off campus to vote, and we assisted them with getting to the polls during the presidential election. And that very year, I was able to take 10 students from my council with me to emerge for the first time so that they could learn about immigration, healthcare, and education. And this was big. This was a big deal because this was the first time a group of Latino students from McDaniel attended a Latino conference, which is crazy because you would think that, they would have done that before, but that wasn't done before. So our comms team at McDaniel went crazy writing about us and bragging about us. But, the thing about me is that, why weren't we given this opportunity before? Why was it until now that we had to fundraise, we had to put in so much work to be able to all attend this very prestigious annual conference in DC, in the nation's capital. And so these are things that I've obviously brought up now, that I'm on the board for diversity for McDaniel. But the very important thing is that the students from my council, we also lobbied on Capitol Hill. We attended these very big galas, we networked with student leaders from across the country, and we were empowered by amazing speakers at the conference. And for me, all of this was just a life-changing experience because I was able to see the impact that attending a conference like Emerge had on the students from my council. And this council specifically was focused on giving students the tools that they need to advocate for the Latino community. So founding it gave me the opportunity to continue to advocate for an issue that matters to me, but also encourage others to do the same. So for me, this LULAC council, it was more like my baby, I it became my baby, and then I had to let my baby go because I had to, graduate. But it was just one of the most transformative experiences of my life. I was able to really, learn how to empower others and teach others how to be advocates in their communities because that's how I see leadership. For me, I always tell people that being a leader is more about empowering others and serving as a mentor to those who also wish to make an impact in their communities because we got to make space for everyone. It can't just be me. We need more people who look like me at these tables. And so having this council has not only helped me grow as a leader but as a person as well, taught me a lot more about leadership. And so after college, I was approached by the state director of Virginia LULAC, and he asked me to join their council, and so I did. It's here in Arlington, Virginia. And 2 years later, he asked me to be his deputy, and I was like, yes, I would love to because I just the work that we were doing in Arlington was just amazing. We were going to different high schools, presenting about scholarships, internships, and fellowships. We were every year sending a young student to the high school conference that LULAC has. We were mentoring a Latino student group at an Arlington high school. We were doing a lot, but after a couple of years, the state director um, told me that he wanted to retire, and so uh, when he stepped down, he asked me if I would like to be appointed state director, and I said, why not? you know. At the time, I didn't think it would be a lot, but now that I'm in the role, it's a lot.
Yeah.
It's definitely a lot, but it's work that fulfills me. So I love it. When I started out as the state director of Virginia LULAC in December of 20, I think 2020, 2020, actually, December 2020. It was a big role, because, we had to figure out a lot of things and we needed to establish councils. And so the biggest thing I think for Virginia LULAC was working on the infrastructure because, you know, it didn't have one. It had no infrastructure. And I worked very closely with the past state director, but in working with him, I realized that we needed to do a lot of work with the infrastructure because, he was ready to retire. So he was, he was like, you know what, just go ahead. Let's just go ahead and run with it. And so I ran with it and I made sure to focus on our infrastructure first, make sure we had a website up, make sure we were a 501c4, make sure, that a lot of boxes were checked in order for us to get started on fundraisers and different events. And so the biggest event we've had was last year in July. We partnered with the Kennedy Center to have this big Latino festival called Viva Cultura. It was a 3-day event where we brought artisans, dancers, we brought in different bands, a DJ, and we showcased a movie that folks were able to watch on the lawn and then talk about after during one of the discussions that was led by the team at the Kennedy Center. So that was the biggest event we've had, and the fact that that we were able to do something like that is just insane. Like thinking about it now, it's just like wow, like I can't believe we did that. But now, we continue to do the kind of work that, I have always envisioned Virginia LULAC doing, having, we currently have a clothing and food drive. In December of last year, we gave out toys to the community I grew up in. So it meant a lot. And, I feel like I mentioned earlier, all of it is just full circle. Like I'm just continuing to do the work that connects with my identity and that fulfills me. And so for folks who want to get involved, specifically with a Virginia LULAC Council, go to www.valulac.org. You will find my information there. You will be able to find how to register for a council in Virginia, and that is how to get involved. But if you want to get involved and get on LULAC's mailing list, just go to www.lulac.org and you can register for their mailing list, or even sign up to be a member through LULAC National, and eventually they'll connect you to the city and state that you identify with. So if you choose Virginia, if you're from Virginia, you'll be connected with me. So that's how to get involved, and I highly recommend getting involved.
Awesome. You heard it here first. And it won't be the last time. So the director, the state director of Virginia LULAC is telling you get involved however you can. So I wanted to tell you that your ancestors, I can hear them clapping. They are so excited about the work you're doing. And thank you so much for like really elevating, the LULAC's presence and whatnot. I think that is such another piece of your leadership, because I'm sure that you're having to galvanize and bring a whole bunch of people together collectively into this space. And so congratulations on your appointment and your work that you've been doing. So big time kudos to you. I wanted to ask you, I wanted to put you on the spot, but what's next for you? Like, what's your future look like, and what's your aspirations? What would you, if you had your dream job, or even if you had to reach for the stars? Like, I mean, you've done a lot. So, what's next for you?
So for me, what's next? I'll be starting my master's in public policy this fall at the University of Virginia, so I'm super excited. You said dream job, and I immediately thought of, this dream I've had for years to run for office someday. Ideally, I'd like to start off as delegate of the 8th Congressional District of Virginia, but if we're talking, like big dream over here, like I want to be a senator. That's always been my dream to run for office, but I want to be a senator. My boyfriend and I always joke that, I can't be president because I wasn't born in this country. But the other highest thing that I could be is what was it, Speaker of the House. So if we really want to aim high, Speaker of the House. But for me, after my master's program, I want to work at a nonprofit that focuses on immigration policy. I want to advocate for immigration policy at the federal level. I feel like after getting my master's, after all this experience, I'm ready to be advocate continue advocating for the immigrant community. And then after that, like I mentioned, I want to run for office. And if I decide to aim high, we'll do senator. So that's what's in the future for me. I hope.
That seems like such a good plan. I think that's not just attainable, but it is going to be realized. I'm so excited to see you in that capacity. I really, truly believe, and I hope you are listening to other people who have your back. I think that you can make that happen. So, Speaker of the House, let's do it. Let's make it happen. That's awesome. And remember Jasmine's name, Jasmin Chavez. Make sure that you vote for her if you can. And if you can't, because you don't reside in that state, make sure that you support her either way. There's other ways. And as we all have seen, crowdfunding and things like that. So when she's ready, she'll let us know. And I'll make sure to let you all know when she's ready to take office and move into that space. So not to kind of continue on in this trajectory, but I think we've touched upon immigration particularly, but what are some of the other important issues that are affecting not only locally the Latinx community, but also maybe even globally? What do you think are some of those things that are kind of propping themselves up and maybe we should pay more attention to?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think, like I mentioned, immigration is a big one, but the other one is healthcare. A lot of folks in Virginia, don't have access to healthcare. And I'm only speaking for Virginia right now, but I'm sure in other states it might be a similar issue. But a lot of folks, just don't have access to resources about how to apply for, different, health cares that are available in that state for free. And so, just making sure that folks have access to information is big, making sure that, you know, things are translated into Spanish is another big one. And so healthcare definitely, education is another one. And I tie education into immigration a lot because as a state director and growing up, in an immigrant community, I've seen, just the struggle with having our immigrant community apply for college because, for DACA recipients specifically, they should be able to have in-state tuition, but that's not always the case. A lot of schools are still making it almost impossible in Virginia for DACA recipients to get in-state tuition. I actually just recently worked with a young student who wasn't able to qualify for in-state tuition even though she has DACA, and it's just crazy that this is something we're still having to deal with because back in the day, with instituting in-state tuition, it was the idea was that everyone would get in-state tuition, but no, it's just our immigrant community continues to be left behind. And I think that with education and the growing cost of schools and just the growing cost of education, like that something needs to be done about that specifically. But um, I also I work for an organization that assists the elderly community. And so another thing that I would highly, say that is an important issue is, finances, financial stuff for our community is another big one. I know a lot of people don't think about it because, it's just something that we don't really talk about. But, now that I work for an organization, that targets the elderly community, I've been able to meet a lot of Latino elders, and a lot of them, are struggling with their financials. And, it's just seeing the way in which we tend to hide that topic and not talk about it because we don't want to talk about debt because folks may have debt, or it's just not talking about it doesn't help us. And so I highly would say find just being educated on financial stuff is important because I'm over here helping folks apply for different programs through the Social Security Administration, and just this goes along with just having access to resources, having just having those resources and having it all be in a language that we can understand is important because if we don't have that, how are we able to learn about healthcare that's available to us for free? How are we able to figure out, okay, like I can apply for SSA at this age, or when I reach, this much of working, like how we don't have that information if we don't have the access to the resources. So those are a few issues I definitely would say are very important in the Latinx community.
Thank you for bringing up the financial piece because I think we neglect that part as well, right? And I think representation also matters in that space, especially since we have seen that the Latinx community, the Latino community actually contributes pretty much to the wealth of of the nation, really, in different capacities, whether it's through taxes and food, or even just investments, period. So I
Mhm.
think, as I think about building wealth and educating people, it's important to also have people who look like us in a sense to actually go out in those communities, speak in the in Spanish to really educate people, because it is an exciting area if you're mystifying it. And to talk about finances, or even to talk about career goals, right? You talked about education in college. That process is intimidating. You illustrated that today. It's probably one of the hardest things to navigate. And not only that, your parents, your guardians are the ones that are feeling shame that they aren't helpful enough, or that they're not navigating the system. And sometimes the system needs to really cater to that re-education or education piece, so that people feel comfortable. And again, that breaks the cycle of oppression, but it also breaks the cycle of uneducated pieces to the system, right? Like, we have to really, really figure out how to navigate not only the system, but also navigate it for ourselves as a people. So thank you for bringing that up. I'm actually, the past few years, I've actually been talking to folks about, um, um, finances and health and financial, in the financial world. It's because I think it's actually, I mean, I may be a geek, but it is exciting to me to talk about how to get people from point A to point B, even if it's just a few $100s that you make, a month, or it's even $50, right? What do you do
Yeah.
with that residual income? You can build up on it and figure out ways in which you can reinvest in yourself and your future.
Yeah.
Um, and I bring this up as well because people coming from other countries, whether they're fleeing, or they just want a better life, or they want success in a different way, um, a lot of folks have education. They just, unfortunately, when they come to the States, they have to start over again because their credentials aren't being recognized. So, for
Mhm.
example, there are tons of folks who are engineers, folks who are
Yeah.
architects, but because they weren't educated in the U.S. system, it becomes a lot harder for them, to kind of actually get employed in those, like, specific fields.
Yeah.
So that's why you find people, especially that cycle where people are finding other positions in ways that aren't necessarily within their scope of work that they did back in their country. So
Yeah.
I want to make sure I have enough time to talk about you. You actually dropped a nugget around what content and what books people should really be, um, you know, putting themselves forward and kind of educating themselves. So what areas, what things would you recommend people dive into to understand our experience, the Latinx experience? What materials should our listeners engage with in understanding the world of equity, diversity, inclusion, and justice?
So I'm moving because I'm actually grabbing a couple of books that I have off of my bookshelf. Um, a movie that I highly recommend everyone watch is called Voces Inocentes. I know a lot about the Salvadoran Civil War because my family went through it, and one of my uncles actually was a soldier in the Civil War, and he died. He was the firstborn in my mom's side of the family. But watching this movie, I think, has helped others really learn about what it is that the Salvadoran community went through. And so, if you want to learn about Salvadoran history, if you want to learn about the Civil War, Voces Inocentes is one of my favorite movies, to watch if I want to, just teach folks about, what the history looked like, what happened, because there is a lot of misinformation out there about it. So, highly recommend Voces Inocentes. I also have this book called Latina Women's Voices from the Borderlands. I really like this book. It talks a lot about, like I mentioned, you know, coming from the border and that experience, but this is, specifically women's voices. So, it talks a lot. It's a very heavy book because it talks about, some of the violence that the women experience. And so, if this is a good book, I highly recommend it as well. Um, I also recommend, like I mentioned earlier, uh, The Distance Between Us. I read it in Spanish because I like I mentioned, I had a major. I majored in Spanish in college, and those were one of the books we had to read. So I read it in Spanish. But in Spanish, it's honestly more beautiful. So if you can read it in Spanish, it's amazing. It talks about Reina Grande and her story of coming to the U.S. Another book I highly recommend is, The House on Mango Street by Sandra Cisneros, Finding Latinx in Search of the Voices Redefining Latino History by Paola Ramos. And I also have this book that I've been meaning to get to because it was a gift from one of my favorite teachers in college. It's called Life on the Hyphen, The Cuban American Way, by Gustavo Perez Firmat. So these are a few of the many books I have on my bookshelf, but books that I love so much because, I love reading about, the issues that our community, faces, and, just reading about the stories of, women who have crossed the border. It's something I have been reading a lot more since I got back from the border because I actually met two women who were 6 months pregnant who dug literally dug a hole from one side of the border to the other just to give their babies who are still in their stomach, a better life. And so for me, like, it's just just crazy, the stuff that people have gone through, the difficult hardships that people have gone through. I've been reading more into that, and trying to you know just read and learn more about that because it's just like, wow, like, just you want to know, like, what are they thinking when they're like, oh my God, like, you know what, like, I'm gonna literally like dig a hole from one side of the border to the other. It's just it's stuff like that that you're like, it continues to reaffirm why I do the work that I do. And so I guess that's why I read it. But I highly recommend those books.
Oh, those are great books. I want to make sure that we tag them in our podcast notes. I think something that I also wanted to highlight is that you also are looking introspectively and interculturally. As far as you have a book up there that you're going to get your hands on around the Cuban experience in particular, but then also looking at it from a diasporic way, and so I just wanted to just say, as a community, whether you are part of the Latinx community or not, to be able to dive into it, head first, feet first, just so that you can get an understanding of people's experiences, especially storytelling. Storytelling is a documentation of data, and it is just as valuable as the numbers. And so, just making sure that people understand that we have to do both quantitative and qualitative work around this because it's so much more layered and complicated than we know. and it continues to be complicated by non-movement. And
Mm-hmm.
organizations are really spearheading a lot of these support systems that need to be in play to make sure that even situations that you just depicted with the two women who were pregnant. I mean, to hear their story and to really, really, really dive into why they're doing what they're doing, it gives you enough of a glimpse of what they're trying to do, which is they're trying to live a better life, not only for themselves, but their kids and their families, right? So
Yeah.
thank you so much for sharing with that. So I always talk about that we are in the Limbo Latino podcast sala, which is our living room. And I feel like you and I have talked about everything under the sun. I think there's actually more that we will hopefully highlight in the future. Love to have you come back uh, um, in a different capacity and possibly in a conference situation, since you talked about the conference, and kind of looking at it from a different perspective in ways that in your work, as you start to dive deeper into it and really become a subject matter expert to really peel back even some of the policy pieces. I think that's another area that we probably would love to pick your brain on. So we're at the end of the show, and I would always give my guests the parting words of wisdom, or maybe just a saying that really leaves an imprint on the La Familia. So I wanted to showcase you and anything that you want to share with the audience about what you want to leave them in our conversation.
Yeah, I think for me, I've always, as a young Latina, I've always struggled to believe in myself. And, people are always saying, like, oh, you've done so much. But, sometimes, I don't, I don't feel like I have, it's just, a thing that goes with growth, right? But for all the Latinas, young Latinas out there listening, I just want to say, believe in yourself, know your worth, and, don't be afraid to talk about yourself, because, you have done a lot, and, folks need to hear about it. They need to hear about your story, and, why you do what you do, and you are valuable. And that's what I want to leave this podcast with.
Jasmine, thank you so much. I think that is the exclamation point to our conversation today. And thank you so much for centering, particularly women and Latinx women, and specifically the diaspora. I think that's such a poignant piece right there that we do not spend enough time on. So thank you so
Yeah.
much. Thank you, my
Thank
participants.
you.
Thank you, my listeners. Thank you for everything. Jasmin Chavez, remember, I don't know what year she's going to be running for office, but you better give her props. You better give her support. And I'll be, making sure that you all know about it. This is the Limbo Latino podcast with my guest, Jasmin Chavez. Thank you so much, Jasmin.
Thank you.